Now, if you're like me, you're probably testing out the features as you're building. So you may add a feature here, test it out, then you might go and add another feature, and then you might run the app and test it out, and so on and so forth. But what if I tell you that there is a much, much easier way to effectively test out your app, get all the bugs fixed, and make sure that you do not introduce any bugs in the future? And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Now, if you stick around until the end, I'm going to be telling you how you can test out your app in the cloud with Firebase on all kinds of cool devices. You definitely do not want to miss this part. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I talk about on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing, rapidly growing Patreon community via the link in the description below the video. So here I am inside of FlutterFlow, and I have here a very, very simple app. This is actually a one-page app. And so I'm going to go ahead and execute this app and show you exactly what it does. All right, so here's our app. Now, this app does only two things, okay? It only has two functions that it provides to the user. The first thing that it does is that if you enter your name, it's going to greet you. So I'm going to say, James. I press go and it says, hello, James. That's it, okay? And you may notice that before you didn't even see this, right? So this widget wasn't even there, okay? It's only after you enter something here, press this button. The next thing that this app does is it executes an API call and displays the result here. And this is actually an API call that gets a list of countries, okay? So if I execute this get countries, we get a list of countries here. So we have a list of countries here and a list of their capitals here. And that is the only thing that this very, very simple app does. Now, when you're building an app and you're adding features, and so let's say you added a couple of these features, obviously you're not going to end here. You are going to add more and more features, but you want to make sure that the stuff that you've added so far keeps working, right? Even though you're going to build on this app and you're going to be adding more and more features, obviously this is not going to be the finished product. You want to make sure that you don't have something called a regression, meaning that as you're adding more and more features and you're testing the latest features, your earlier features break. They essentially stop working. You do not want that. And the way to solve it, well, there's a couple of ways to solve it. One is that anytime you make any changes, you can manually test it out. You can manually test every single feature up to the last feature that you've just implemented. But there's an even easier way of doing it, and that is letting the computer do it for you. And you do that via creating tests, okay? And so if we jump back into FlutterFlow, FlutterFlow provides something called tests, right? So if you come in here, I created two tests that automatically run this app and make sure that it does exactly what it needs to do. Now, before we go deeper here, I just want to quickly give you a quick overview of how tests work. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to these kinds of apps, there are three types of tests that you can build into your app that will help you catch bugs. The first test is a widget test. Okay, so as you're building widgets here, you can build a specific test that tests everything around that widget. Well, let's say I have here a button. Well, a button is a widget, and so I can go ahead and build all kinds of tests having to do with this button, right? Having to do with its appearance, having to do with its action, having to do with how it performs, whether it is enabled, disabled, etc., etc. That is a widget test. Another type of test is a unit test, right? And this is where you break up your app into different units and test them separately, okay? So you might have some kind of an API call, that's a separate unit. You might have some kind of, a feature here that, does maybe a Pomodoro kind of circle animation. That's a different unit. That's called unit testing. With FlutterFlow here, we have something called integration testing. And integration testing is a lot more general, right? We're not breaking this app into different things, into different components. All we're doing is we are creating tests in terms of how this app should be performing. And so if I jump here, I have two tests here, and the first test tests the first functionality, whereas the second test tests the second functionality. So we have here check field and check countries. Now, if I click here, this check field guarantees that that field pops up where it says hello name or hello James. That field needs to appear. Now, we're not checking for the actual text. We're checking if that field appears, if that widget becomes visible. And you create these tests in essentially 3 steps. The first thing that you're doing is you are telling the app how to interact. And so the first step here is what the user would be doing first. And what they would be doing first is entering the name. And so in this step here, we are interacting with this widget here. This widget here, we are saying that we want to enter a specific text here. So we say enter text, okay? Now, in the second step, what we're doing is we're interacting with this widget, right? And this is where the user presses this button here. And as you can see, it says here, interact with widget, tap, right? So this was enter text, and this here is tap. And so the user essentially taps on this button here. Now, the next thing is very, very important, okay? This is where you want to wait for something to happen, okay? This step, we're essentially waiting, right? It's called waiting to load. And we give it a duration of 1000 milliseconds, okay? And this is 1 second. Because when you click this, it's not instant, right? It's not instant. It takes, it takes a little bit of time. Maybe it takes a half a second. Maybe it takes a quarter of a second. Maybe it takes 1 second or 2 seconds. We give it a duration. And last but not least, and this is the most important step, we're saying expect result, right? So when all this is said and done, we want something to happen. We want the app to do something, right? We are building UI apps, right? We're building apps that interact with the user via the UI. And so here what we're saying is we expect the result. We select from UI Builder, right? So if I click here, I can do a select, and I can click here and I can select this thing, right? I want this to appear, I confirm. And the expectation is we're going to find one widget here, okay? And that's it. Now, if it doesn't find a widget or it finds like 20 widgets, this test would fail, okay? So this is the first test here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second test, okay? Now, in the second test, what we're doing here is we have one last step now, okay? So unlike in this test where the user needs to enter something and press the button, here they just need to press the button. So they do not need to enter anything. And so in this step, we just have a tap event, right? We're interacting with this widget here, and we are pressing the button, right? We're using this tap here, okay? Next, we're waiting for it to load, right? We need to make sure that we have this step. If we do not have this step, it would fail because this takes a little bit of time. Okay, so the default here is 1 second, right? The default is 1 second. And if this is failing, you may want to increase it, right? Because this is an API call. So maybe making it something like 2000 milliseconds is much more practical. And last but not least, we are expecting to see a list view here, okay? And this is a one widget here, which is a list view, okay? Now, when you're building these tests, you have a couple of options here, right? So, if you start here, you have 3 things that you can choose from, right? Which is the interaction, the waiting, and the expectation. And so there's not a lot of things to choose from, but it kind of makes sense, right? You're interacting, you're waiting, and you're getting a result. That's really all it is, right? With these integration tests, it's really that simple. Now, it gets a little bit more complex when you're expecting a result, right? So when you're expecting a result, you have a bunch of options, right? So what do you expect to see? Well, in this case, I expect to see a list. Now, list is one widget, right? We're not talking about these rows here, right? We're not talking about the number of countries. We are talking about one widget, right? This list view here, okay? And so I'm saying here, finds number of widget. I can also say find one widget, okay? It's the same thing, right? I can say finds number of widget, which is 1. Or I can just say finds one widget, which is going to be the same thing. Now I can save it here. and we have created the test. Now, once you created these tests, you can't really test them out in FlutterFlow, at least not yet. What you need to do is you need to go ahead and download this app and test everything out locally. And so that is what we're going to do now. Now, the way that you do it is actually very, very simple. You can simply click here and you have this option called FlutterFlow CLI. You can simply copy this, and when you do that, you're going to be copying this entire command. Now, if you've never done this before, you might want to click here and read more about it and maybe even set it up. But it's very, very easy. So I'm going to copy this command right here. I'm going to go to my terminal here, and I'm going to paste this command. Once I execute this command, it's going to download this entire app and save it on my local computer. And so if I do this, I have this new app here called Test. So if I go into Test, this is my Flutter app essentially. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it inside of Visual Studio Code, and you can do the same thing. It's absolutely free, or you can use Android Studio as well, another amazing free tools. And once I run this command, I have this window pop up and it tells me that I don't have some packages, and you always want to run that, right? Because it's going to download the dependencies for your Flutter app. And at this point, we have our Flutter app that we have developed inside of FlutterFlow. And if you recall, FlutterFlow is simply a visual wrapper on top of Flutter, right? And so here is our Flutter app. And what's interesting here is if you head over to this integration test directory here and you click on test.dart, you're going to see all the code for your test. Now, remember, we had two tests here. We had this check field and we had check countries, right? And we did it visually inside of FlutterFlow. And what FlutterFlow did is it went ahead and it generated the code for them, right? So as you can see, we have this enter text, where it enters James inside of the text field, and then it has that tap event on that button, and then it has this pump and settle, which is where it waits for the result, right? It waits for something to come back for, in this case, 1,000 milliseconds. And last but not least, it tries to find a widget that has this key, and it's got to be one widget. Okay, so if that widget does not appear, or if there are many widgets, this test would fail. Now, the next thing that we need to do is you want to head over where it says main, and here you can run your test. So we're going to go ahead and run it, and it's going to open up a browser session, and it's going to mimic as though a user is actually using this app. So here's our browser session, and it's going to go ahead and run the first test and then the second test. So it ran the first test, it saw that, and now it ran the second test. And if we head back here, it says all tests passed. Okay. Now, if I make a quick change, let's say I make a change and I say, well, I'm expecting to see 2 list views, right? So what I can do is I can go ahead and I can type find, and I can say at least, or I can say finds n widgets, right? So let's say I expect to find 20 of these list view widgets, which is not correct. There should be only one list view, okay? So we've made this quick change, and this test should fail, okay? So we're going to go stop this session here, and we are going to run these tests again. So I'm going to go ahead, press run here. That's going to start a brand new testing session. It's going to load up the Chrome browser and run our app. All right, so there's the browser, and it's about ready to start testing. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so it ran everything, and it got 1 list view, but I told it that we are expecting 20 of these list views. Now, if you go down, as you can see, some tests have failed. And why is that? Well, if you scroll up, you will see the test description was check countries, okay? And if you scroll up, you will see that found 1 widget with key list view, which is not enough. Remember, we told it that we are expecting 20 of them. And that's why if you scroll down, you see it's completely different messages, right? Some tests have failed, test failed, see exception logs, and it says the test description was check countries, okay? So the first test succeeded, but the second one failed, okay? And so if we go ahead and fix it, and we say how we had it before, 1 widget, it should work again. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this here. We're going to hit run again, and it's going to restart, and hopefully both tests should succeed now. Okay, so there's our browser there. There's our testing session. It loads it up, executes this one, come back, all tests have passed. Okay, and so as you can see, this is very, very useful. And in fact, if you're building any kind of software, you should definitely be using this. Now, it's important to mention that this is actually a premium feature. So having access to this and being able to create, lots and lots of tests will depend on your specific FlutterFlow plan. Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you, and that is the ability to test out your app under different scenarios in the cloud using Firebase. If you head over to FlutterFlow's documentation for automated tests, you can see that you can download and test all of this locally or through a service like Firebase Test Lab. And so if you click here, you're going to learn more about this Firebase Test Lab and how exactly it works, so that you can test your app in the cloud under all kinds of different scenarios, maybe with different devices, different orientations, etc., etc. It's actually very, very cool. But let me show you exactly how this works. Now, if you Google for Flutter integration testing, you're going to have really, really good documentation of how it works. And so if you want to download your code and you want to put more tests and try different tests, you're going to have really, really good documentation. But if you scroll down, they have really, really good instructions on testing your app on Firebase Test Lab. So if you scroll down, they have these instructions here, and this is exactly what we're going to be doing. So we're going to copy this here. We're going to paste this here. Next, we're going to copy this here, paste this here, and that is going to create an APK of your app, which is essentially a package containing your app. So that's going to take a couple of moments, took 5 seconds for me. Next, you want to copy this command here, paste it here, and that's going to go ahead and take a couple of moments there. Okay, that is complete. And last but not least, you want to copy this command, which is going to generate the special code for your test that we have created here. So I'm going to paste this, and you want to remove this, right? Because this test.dart should match this test.dart that we have here. So we're going to execute this command here, and that's also going to take a couple of moments. Okay, it's almost done, 99%. Okay, there you have it, built successful in 23 seconds. And the next thing that you want to do is you want to drag the debug APK from this directory into this test lab. And so we're going to go to our test lab. We're going to click on run a test. We're going to select Robo here. Here, we're going to browse. We're going to select this APK that we have created just now. We're going to hit upload. We're going to wait for this to upload. All right, so it finished uploading. The next thing that we want to do is we want to hit continue. And here we're going to be selecting devices on which to test our app. So here we can click on customize. And here you can select all kinds of devices. Okay, so it says here recommended device. So I'm going to just select this device here. I'm going to select it, and maybe I can select this one here. Okay, so I'm going to select this one. So I have 2 devices. I'm going to hit confirm. And I'm going to start 2 tests on these 2 devices here. I'm going to say start to test. And now I need to wait a little bit. Okay, it's going to take a little bit of time, and we are going to be getting our results after it has completed. All right, so after 10 minutes of waiting, we have gotten our results back. So as you can see, it says here passed, and 2 are passed, and total devices is 2. And here we can see screenshot clusters. Okay, so we can click here. This is our app, click on view, and we can see all the screenshots. We can see how the app was working. So this is on Galaxy A10 here. And as you can see, there's some overflowing issues that you can see right away. And you can kind of scroll down and you can see exactly what's been happening. And if you keep scrolling, you're going to get to Pixel 5. And it looks almost the same. You see how it's typing James here, right? So this is our Pixel 5 after Galaxy A10. And it's typing James, and it sees hello James. So this test passes, and then it also does this get countries, and this also passes. And as you can see, these are our screenshots here. Okay, and so this is another really solid way of testing out your app in the cloud, right? And instead of testing it locally, right? So let's say, you built a lot of tests and you go to sleep or you go out or you're doing something else. You can simply upload your APK here and have the system test it out. And, they give you lots of different devices, lots of different things. And this is a must, all right? If you're building an app, you want to have tests, right? Because as you are coding, as you're doing all these things, yeah, you're going to be testing that latest feature, but are you going to be testing that first feature, that initial feature? I know I get caught a lot, with all kinds of bugs. Even though I'm testing the latest fixes, the initial ones, I have lots and lots of regressions. And so testing is a must. Use it, leverage it, study it, put it to work, and let it work for you. And the best way to kind of get started with testing, learn about it, is to be able to view and or clone the app that I built. Because if you take a look at this app, you can see all the tests that I have here. You can take a look at all these tests, because if you're able to take a look at this app and kind of see what's happening here, not only will you see this functionality, but you also see the tests. And most importantly, you're also going to get access to the code to this app. And so you're going to see the exact code here. And here you can enter more tests, right? So this is just one test here, right? You can enter more. You can enter as many tests as you want. You can create them in these little groups here. You can kind of label them, or you can just create them here, and you can have as many as you want. You can have, 2 tests like I have here. You can have 20 if you want. You can have 50 if you want. It really depends on how complex your app is. And the best way to get access to all of this, get access to our amazing community, get answers to your questions, get some support, is by joining our amazing Patreon community. Because when you join our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to all the resources that I talked about in today's video, you're also going to get access to all my apps that I've talked about on this channel. They're all there, and you can view them, you can clone them, you can ask questions about them. They're all available, and you can connect with others who may be working on the same issues as you are. And that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're also going to get access to extra content, such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and our Patreon supported masterclass series, where I do deep dives on various topics, maybe app builders, tools, techniques, functionalities that the community votes on. So essentially the community votes on a specific topic, and I create a comprehensive, a deep dive video about that topic. I also try to answer as many questions as I can. And so if you're serious about no code, if you're not somebody who is just kind of, looking at it and, just in your spare time, but you're actually serious about it, maybe you want to build apps, maybe you want to start a business, maybe you want to start a software company, then, you definitely need to join our amazing Patreon community. Because if you're liking the content that we have here on this channel, you're going to get access to a lot more content via our amazing Patreon community. So if all of that sounds good and you're looking to kind of level up your no-code game, your no-code knowledge, then definitely check it out and consider becoming a subscriber. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.